Hello, I'm Hope Logan. I'm an actor on Bold and the Beautiful, and many people really love both me and our Bold and the Beautiful drama. So I've come here to share updates about my beloved Bold and the Beautiful. Everyone, please subscribe and support me. If you do, I will keep coming every day with new updates for you. Hope Logan finds herself growing more frustrated by the day as Forrester once again pushes the hope for the future line to the sidelines, treating it like an afterthought instead of the fully prepared collection it is. The tension inside Forrester Creations is building, and it's becoming impossible for Hope to ignore the pattern that keeps repeating itself. Even as she tries to stay focused, the sense of being undervalued and constantly delayed begins to weigh heavily on her. Meanwhile, Zende Forrester, who has been working closely with Hope and putting real effort into the designs, is quietly sensing that something is wrong before he even gets the full picture. What starts as frustration soon begins to feel like a breaking point, as the idea of Hope finally walking away from Forrester Creations and taking her vision somewhere else starts to feel less like a possibility and more like an inevitable decision waiting to happen. That pressure escalates when Steffi blindsides Hope in the design office with a cold, calculated approach that immediately shifts the atmosphere. Steffi, still clearly irritated by the unexpected success of Katie Logan's fashion showcase, arrives carrying that resentment like fuel for confrontation. She brings up Liam Spencer and the victory party celebrating Katie's achievement, questioning whether anyone even had the right to use Eric Forrester's designs in the first place. Her tone reflects the growing divide, echoing the same accusations Ridge and others have been repeating about the Logans overstepping boundaries. Steffi's frustration spills into a broader attack, insisting that Logan women act selfishly and suggesting that Katie has taken advantage of Eric's kindness while leaving him full of regret. It becomes clear that Steffi is once again fully aligned against the Logans, reigniting old tensions that never truly disappeared. Hope pushes back, defending Katie and refusing to accept the accusations being thrown at her aunt, even though the situation is clearly escalating. Deep down, she knows Eric himself chose to support Katie's project, and that the collaboration wasn't forced or stolen as Steffi claims. Still, Hope avoids turning the argument into a full-scale confrontation, choosing instead to step back and not get dragged into the emotional chaos. But even as she tries to remain calm, the imbalance of power becomes more obvious, especially with Steffi refusing to honor the working agreement they had established. Hope has already confirmed that her collection is completed, fully designed, and ready to move forward, with Thomas and Zende both giving their approval. Yet Steffi shuts everything down, insisting the line will remain on hold, repeating a pattern that Hope has endured far too many times before. Even after staying loyal through past hardships involving Thomas and even personal sacrifices tied to Deacon. As the conversation continues, Steffi makes it clear that the decision is final, stating that Forrester Creations is shifting its focus to couture, and that hope for the future will simply have to wait. That explanation does little to soften the impact, and instead it feels increasingly personal, as though Hope is being singled out yet again. Hope directly questions the decision, unable to ignore the timing and the repeated cancellations that always seem to follow tension with the Logans. Steffi insists it is strictly business and not personal, but that explanation fails to convince anyone involved, especially Hope, who can feel the emotional undertone behind every decision being made. The situation intensifies further when Zende enters the conversation, visibly frustrated and disappointed since he has invested significant effort into the collection and now sees it shelved without warning. The reality of the line being paused indefinitely hits hard, reinforcing the sense that Hope's work is never truly secure at Forrester Creations. Later, the scene shifts to the Spencer mansion, where Hope and Liam join Katie and Bill for dinner, and the conversation takes on a more reflective tone. Katie acknowledges the success of Eric's designs, but admits that it represents only one collection, and that she still needs to figure out what comes next. The comment hangs in the air longer than expected, prompting subtle glances between Hope and Liam that reveal underlying concerns about direction and stability. Bill's presence adds another layer, especially as he reminds Liam that Hope is now part of the Spencer family and remains something of an outsider at Forrester Creations. That statement quietly reframes everything, suggesting that Hope may no longer fully belong in the world she has been trying so hard to succeed in. As the conversation unfolds, the possibility begins to form that Liam could encourage Hope to consider aligning her future more closely with the Spencer and Logan business interests instead. That idea slowly gains momentum as Hope begins questioning whether she can truly trust Forrester Creations to honor its commitments to her line. The repeated delays and shifting priorities make it harder for her to believe that her work will ever be treated with consistent respect there. The situation becomes even more complicated when she recalls how Eric's contract obligations were ignored without consequence, while her own agreements seem to carry less weight in comparison. At the same time, she remains committed to her current obligations, but the stability she once relied on is clearly fading. Liam and Bill both subtly reinforce the idea that her future might be more secure elsewhere, especially if Forrester continues to sideline her vision. With Deke Sharp already connected to her creative direction, the idea of building something new outside Forrester begins to feel increasingly realistic. As the emotional and professional tension continues to build, the possibility of Hope leaving Forrester Creations and taking her line to the Logan side of the fashion world starts to take shape more seriously. Liam appears increasingly supportive of the idea, recognizing that Hope needs a stable environment where her work won't constantly be interrupted or minimized. Bill's earlier reminder about her identity as a Spencer only strengthens the argument that she may no longer fit within the Forrester structure. If Hope were to make that move, she could potentially bring Zende with her, especially since he has also felt undervalued and repeatedly sidelined despite his talent and dedication. However, Thomas Forrester is not part of that equation, as both his past with Hope and his design direction make his involvement unlikely, while Deke remains the more natural creative partner in her evolving vision. From a broader perspective, Steffi's position becomes increasingly complicated, as part of her may even welcome Hope's departure while publicly expressing outrage over it. Removing Hope from Forrester Creations would eliminate ongoing tension, but it would also reshape the company's creative identity in ways that could have long-term consequences. The Forrester family could respond by repositioning Thomas or even pairing him with R.J. Forrester, while also pushing forward a strong couture identity led by Eric Forrester to reassert dominance in the fashion world. There is even the possibility of a generational collaboration concept involving Eric, Ridge, and Thomas, designed to remind the industry of Forrester's legacy strength. Meanwhile, Hope, Zende, and Deke forming a new creative force at Logan could redefine competition entirely, especially if they focus on younger, trend-driven audiences that Forrester risks losing. All of this ties back into deeper history, including the fact that Hope has already challenged Forrester Creations before during moments of intense conflict, even being involved in a power shift attempt against the founding family. That history makes it entirely believable that she would walk away again if she felt pushed far enough or dismissed repeatedly. If that happens, the fallout would be massive, especially with Brooke Logan likely reacting strongly and possibly accusing Katie of both influencing Hope's departure and benefiting from Eric's designs in the process. In the end, what begins as a scheduling decision over a fashion line could evolve into a full-scale reshaping of alliances, loyalties, and power within both Forrester and Logan worlds, leaving everyone on the edge of a major turning point. As the tension quietly settles after that explosive web of conversations, an uneasy calm spreads across both households, but it doesn't last long. Beneath the surface, decisions are already forming, even if no one is saying them out loud yet. Hope finds herself unable to shake the feeling that something irreversible has already begun, like a door slowly closing behind her, while another one, somewhere else, is starting to open. Every conversation she has had, from Steffi's cold dismissal to Liam's careful suggestions and Bill's blunt perspective, keeps replaying in her mind like fragments of a warning she can no longer ignore. At Forrester Creations, the atmosphere feels no less unstable, as staff and designers quietly sense that another shift in power and creative direction is coming. Nothing is fully spoken, but everything is felt. And that unspoken tension is exactly what makes the situation so volatile. Back at Forrester, Zende is the first to truly sit with the weight of what Steffi's decision means for him personally. He had poured himself into hope for the future with genuine commitment, believing the line had momentum and purpose again. Now, that progress feels abruptly erased, not because of creative failure, but because of internal priorities shifting once more. The frustration building inside him isn't loud, but it is steady, and it deepens his awareness that loyalty alone may not be enough to secure his place in the company's future direction. As he watches the direction Forrester is taking toward couture, he begins to question whether there is still room for designers like him who thrive in accessible, forward-thinking fashion. That quiet realization becomes the first crack in his long-standing connection to the company. Meanwhile, Hope begins to move through her own workday with a different kind of clarity forming beneath her disappointment. What once felt like temporary setbacks now feels like a repeating cycle she has outgrown. She recalls every time her line was paused, rebranded, or deprioritized, and the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss. Even though she has always tried to stay patient and professional, there is a growing awareness that patience alone has not protected her vision. The emotional weight of that realization doesn't explode outward. It settles inward, slowly reshaping how she sees her future. And for the first time, she doesn't immediately push the thought away. Instead, she lets it linger, uncomfortable but persistent, as if her instincts are finally speaking louder than her loyalty. It isn't long before Liam notices that shift in her. He knows Hope well enough to recognize when she is trying to stay composed while something deeper is shifting underneath. Their conversations become quieter, more reflective, as he gently encourages her to consider what stability really means for her and her work. He doesn't push her toward a decision, but he also doesn't hide his belief that she deserves better consistency than what she has been experiencing. His perspective is shaped not just by business logic, but by a growing concern that Hope keeps investing herself in a place that keeps pulling the ground out from under her. That concern begins to take shape as an idea neither of them fully voices yet, but both are clearly circling around. At the same time, Katie finds herself in a different kind of pressure entirely. Her success with Eric's designs has brought attention and excitement, but it has also left her with the responsibility of what comes next. The recognition feels rewarding but incomplete, as if she has opened a door without yet knowing where the path leads beyond it. That uncertainty lingers in her conversation with Bill, who views everything through a more strategic lens, always thinking several steps ahead. While Katie focuses on the present success, Bill quietly considers how this moment could reshape the entire fashion landscape between the Logans and Forresters. And without directly stating it, his mindset reinforces the idea that expansion, or even recruitment, might soon become necessary. As these parallel threads continue unfolding, the idea of movement begins to form more clearly around Hope. The possibility of her leaving Forrester Creations no longer feels like speculation, but like a decision that could emerge quickly under the right pressure. Liam's earlier suggestion about aligning her future with Logan-linked opportunities begins to feel less abstract and more grounded in reality. If she were to take that step, she would not be walking away alone in terms of creative vision. Zende's dissatisfaction, combined with his talent and investment in her line, makes him a natural counterpart in any potential transition. The thought of rebuilding something new, rather than repeatedly defending something unstable, starts to take shape in her mind as a quieter form of relief. Yet the emotional complexity of that idea cannot be ignored. Walking away from Forrester Creations would not just be a professional shift. It would be a break from years of history, conflict, compromise, and resilience. Hope remembers every moment she stayed when leaving might have been easier. Every time she adapted instead of walked away. That history weighs heavily against any impulsive decision, making her hesitation just as strong as her frustration. And still, the imbalance she keeps experiencing refuses to disappear, forcing her to confront the uncomfortable truth that loyalty has not guaranteed stability. That realization sits with her longer each day, becoming harder to ignore. On the other side, Steffi remains firmly rooted in her decisions, though even her certainty carries traces of underlying tension. Her focus on couture and legacy branding is driven by both strategy and emotion, especially after the recent success of outside collaborations that she believes blurred boundaries. In her mind, tightening control over the company's direction is necessary to protect its identity, even if it creates friction internally. But what she sees as protection, others increasingly perceive as exclusion. And that perception slowly feeds into the very instability she is trying to prevent, creating a cycle that continues to escalate without resolution. As both sides continue moving forward in their own directions without realizing how far apart they are drifting, the foundation beneath Forrester Creations begins to feel less stable than ever. Hope's growing awareness, Zende's frustration, Liam's subtle encouragement, and Katie's expanding responsibilities all begin to intersect in ways that suggest an approaching shift. Nothing has officially changed yet, but everything is positioned for change. And in the center of it all stands Hope, quietly realizing that the next decision she makes may not just affect her career, but could redefine the balance between two powerful fashion worlds entirely. As the days continue to unfold, the quiet tension that has been building beneath every conversation begins to harden into something far more decisive. Hope moves through Forrester Creations with a growing sense that she is no longer just waiting for approval, but waiting for a pattern to repeat itself once again. Each time she checks in on the status of Hope for the future, the answer remains the same: delayed, paused, or redirected toward future consideration. That language, once tolerable, now feels like a wall slowly closing in around her creativity. She starts to notice how often her presence in meetings feels secondary, how quickly discussions move past her ideas, and how easily her line is pushed aside whenever couture becomes the priority. The frustration is no longer sharp and reactive. It has become quiet, steady, and deeply personal in a way she can no longer ignore. Zende, on the other hand, is no longer just disappointed. He is beginning to reassess his entire position within the company. The shelving of Hope for the future doesn't just affect his workload, it affects his sense of purpose as a designer. He remembers the energy he put into the collection, the collaboration, the belief that this was something evolving and growing into a strong creative identity. Now that momentum feels abruptly cut off, replaced by silence and uncertainty. As he watches couture take center stage once again, he begins to question whether his creative voice truly fits within Forrester's current direction, or whether he is being slowly pushed into the background along with every other project that doesn't align with the family's immediate priorities. Hope and Liam's conversations become more frequent, but also more subdued, as though both of them are carefully circling a truth they are not yet ready to fully name. Liam sees the shift in her confidence, the way she no longer speaks about Forrester Creations with the same certainty she once had. He doesn't pressure her, but he does gently reinforce the idea that her value as a designer shouldn't depend on being constantly validated by a system that keeps destabilizing her work. That perspective begins to settle into Hope's thinking in a way that feels less like outside influence and more like confirmation of what she has already started to feel on her own. The idea of change stops feeling dramatic or reckless and starts feeling like something practical, almost necessary. At the same time, Katie's world is also expanding under the pressure of success. The positive response to Eric's designs has elevated her position, but it has also created expectations that she now has to meet. The question of what comes next hangs over her like an unfinished sentence. And while she is proud of what has been achieved, she is also aware that momentum in fashion is fragile. Bill, ever the strategist, views this moment as an opportunity rather than a conclusion. He begins subtly framing the situation in terms of growth, expansion, and long-term positioning, hinting that Logan influence in the fashion industry could become far more significant if handled correctly. His perspective quietly reinforces the idea that this is not just a creative moment. It is a turning point in power dynamics. That underlying shift begins to pull Hope further into reflection. The more she observes how quickly priorities change at Forrester, the more she questions whether stability there is even possible for her line. She remembers every promise made when hope for the future was revived, every assurance that it would finally have room to grow, and contrasts it with the reality she is now living. The inconsistency is no longer something she can rationalize as business fluctuation. It feels structural. And with that realization, the idea of building something outside Forrester Creations stops feeling like rebellion and starts feeling like preservation of her own creative identity. Zende's position becomes even more uncertain as he begins to openly acknowledge, at least in private conversations, that his future might not be as secure as he once believed. The couture focus leaves little space for the kind of collaborative, evolving design work he thrives in. As he watches opportunities narrow rather than expand, he starts to consider what it would mean to work somewhere his contributions are not constantly dependent on shifting corporate priorities. And in that thought, for the first time, the possibility of leaving Forrester doesn't feel unthinkable. It feels logical. Hope, meanwhile, begins to feel the emotional weight of a decision slowly forming in real time. It is not a single moment of clarity, but a gradual accumulation of frustration, recognition, and restraint finally reaching its limit. Liam's earlier suggestion about aligning with Logan-connected opportunities resurfaces more frequently in her thoughts. Not as a directive, but as an alternative path that finally feels stable enough to consider seriously. The idea of building hope for the future under a structure that actually protects its continuity begins to take shape in her imagination with increasing clarity. And as that vision strengthens, the contrast with her current situation becomes harder to ignore. Even Steffi's position, though outwardly firm, begins to reveal subtle consequences she cannot fully control. Her push toward couture and strict brand direction reinforces Forrester's identity, but it also risks alienating the very designers who bring diversity and innovation to the company's portfolio. While she believes she is protecting the legacy of the brand, others begin to see a pattern of elimination rather than balance. That tension creates an environment where departures no longer feel like isolated incidents, but potential dominoes waiting to fall. And whether Steffi acknowledges it or not, every sideline project adds weight to the possibility that someone like Hope might eventually decide to stop waiting entirely. By the time Hope finally sits alone with her thoughts, the decision does not arrive as a dramatic revelation. Instead, it forms quietly, like something that has been building for a long time and simply reached its natural conclusion. She begins to understand that staying where she constantly has to fight for visibility is not the same as loyalty. It is endurance without stability. And while she is not ready to act immediately, she is no longer resisting the idea that change may be necessary. Around her, every conversation, every delay, every sidelined promise continues to point toward the same direction. And somewhere in that realization, the future of Hope for the Future begins to shift. Not as something being paused, but as something preparing to move somewhere entirely new.